Beer, by definition, is an alcoholic beverage produced by the yeasty fermentation of cereal grains, usually barley, in water that's more often than not flavored with hops. But where does beer come from? Where and when did it all start? I'm the Spirits Professor, and we're going to answer just that. Please like, subscribe, and comment below. Okay, let's dive in to the history of beer. Some of the earliest evidence for fermented cereal drinks dates back well over 13,000 years. Pre-agricultural people soaked wild grains to make porridge or gruel. When there were leftovers or forgotten pots, wild yeast mingled with the gruel and spontaneously fermented those starches. Boom. Beer. Sort of. Jump forward around 7,000 years ago, Chinese pottery shards show residues of fermented brews, combinations of millet, rice, honey, and fruit, which is an example of early beer, but it wouldn't really be recognizable as beer to us today. By 3500 BC, we see beer culture with early biological engineering in Iran. At Godin Tepe, archaeologists found beer stones and processing evidence. So at least 5,500 years ago, people were refining milling and fermentation techniques to make early examples of beer for the masses. Early grain-based fermented drinks spread like wildfire around 5,000 years ago. Ancient European pottery shows signs of brewing all over the continent, thanks to residues in vessels used for grain fermenting. There's evidence that Egypt was brewing ancient beer around the same time due to evidence found in tombs, from brewing residues to detailed beer recipes carved into stone. At the same time across the Americas, corn-based fermented drinks like chicha were becoming commonplace across both North and South American indigenous populations. And since corn, or maize, is a cereal grain, it 100% counts as a style of beer. By 2000 BC, people in cities like Uruk in ancient Mesopotamia were employing professional brewers. Beer was so important to ancient life that it shows up in literature, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where brewing and drinking beer is mentioned a lot. By 1900 BC, Sumer had formalized beer deeply into their culture, with the hymn to Ninkasi, which is both a prayer and a brewing recipe celebrating the goddess of beer. But the ancient Middle East wasn't the only place leaning heavily into beer. In Britain, archaeologists have found 2,000-year-old beer pots in Cambridgeshire that hint at a large culture around the grainy beverage. Meanwhile, ancient India had sura, a fermented grain drink consumed in ritual and daily life and enshrined in the Vedic texts. By 400 BC, Greek historian, politician, and philosopher Xenophon researched and documented beer and fermented grain drinks across the ancient world, from Armenia to Greece and beyond. Fast forward a few hundred years, and Romans were spreading beer across their empire through trade and conquest. And while beer was popular, wine still dominating among Mediterranean elites and status seekers. After Rome's fall, beer persisted and evolved in post-Roman Europe as monasteries full of monks preserved and improved brewing knowledge for the next few hundred years. Before we go on, an important point. Ancient beers, pretty much everything we've been talking about so far, differed greatly from modern beers. They were thicker, more like gruel, and commonly drunk through straws from communal vessels to avoid solids. But that was about to change drastically. Cut to around 800 AD and the Carolingian era. Monasteries have become central to beer, and those monks making beer added the final, crucial ingredient that'd make beer recognizable to me and you: hops. That final touch added bitterness, aroma, flavor, and preservative qualities. Beer was forever changed. Over the next millennia, humans toiled over beer and slowly turned it into the drink we have now. German brewers industrialized production by the 1300s. It was so successful that the word beer was slowly starting to take hold as the word for the drink. This brewing know-how spread through Europe and to Britain by the 1500s, along with the name. Regional styles began to emerge as local grains, yeasts, water sources, and techniques varied. In 1516, Bavaria codified beer standards with the Reinheitsgebot, a purity law limiting ingredients and influencing quality and tradition. Beer was truly starting to become something very recognizable to what we know now. The 18th and 19th centuries brought steam engines, thermometers, and better malting. Technology made beer easier to produce consistently, improving quality and scale. At the same time, hyper-regional styles proliferated. Porter, lambic, pale ales, pilsners, and so many more became common, with each style tied to place and people. Then it happened. In 1842, Pilsner was invented in Bohemia by Bavarian brewer Josef Groll. Though Groll and the people of Pilsen didn't know it at the time, but Pilsner lagers were about to change the way the world drank beer. A few short years later, Viennese lager and Pilsner, both pale and dark, spread to Mexico, Central, and South America via European colonists, shaping local beer cultures. The same thing happened going east to China and Japan. By the 20th century, beer achieved global dominance, with pilsners and pale lagers leading the charge. Industrial brewing, international brands, and mass markets made beer ubiquitous on every continent. Beer had become so big that by the late 20th century, the craft beer explosion took over the story, with small local breweries, experimental styles, and revived historic techniques. This shift from macro to micro would reshape consumer taste and diversity. Quick primer on categories. Ales use top fermenting yeast at warmer temps. Lagers use bottom fermenting yeasts at cooler temps. And styles like barley wine are top fermented but pack a much bigger alcohol content. Still, every style of beer slots into either an ale or lager category. Today, beer is a truly global industry. Last year alone, beer accounted for a $660 billion market worldwide. That means beer has a massive cultural impact, with countless beer festivals, markets, and cultures across the entire globe. To recap, soaked wild grains were fermented in prehistory. 7,000-year-old Chinese pottery and archaeological evidence at Godin Tepe show early refinement. 5,000-year evidence across Europe, Asia, and North Africa show the same. Mesopotamia's brewers formalized the craft. Across indigenous America, fermented corn becomes chicha. After Rome, beer comes into focus with monasteries and monks leading to hops. Next, Bohemian and German brewers shaped modern beer with the Reinheitsgebot, industrial tech, and hoppy Pilsner, which leads to a massive global spread before craft brewing takes everything back to the local level. All of this has led to today's enormous, varied, and global beer cultures. That makes beer more than just some drink. It's a story of luck, agriculture, microbiology, religion, technology, innovation, and community, made by countless hands over 10,000 plus years of human achievement. That's worth a big cheers. If you enjoyed the story of beer, please like, comment, and subscribe below. See you next week for a deep dive into bourbon.